Robert Durst had everything. Born into one of New York's most powerful real estate dynasties, heir to billions, and married to a beautiful dental hygienist named Kathie McCormack. On the surface, he was living the American dream. But behind the luxury apartments and family fortune, something sinister was brewing. By 1981, friends noticed bruises on Kathie's arms. Her brother Jim McCormack would later recall a chilling scene. He grabbed her by the hair and pretty much yanked her off the couch. The Golden Boy was about to become America's most notorious suspect. January 31st, 1982. Kathie Durst was just months away from graduating medical school, ready to become a pediatrician. That night, she attended a party thrown by her friend in Connecticut. But then came the call, an angry conversation with her estranged husband, Robert. Witnesses saw her leave, visibly upset. According to Robert, he drove her to the Katonah train station so she could return to Manhattan for classes. That was supposedly the last time he saw her alive. 5 days later, he finally called police to report her missing. 5 whole days. The initial investigation was a masterclass in how wealth and influence can shield someone from justice. Robert Durst told police conflicting stories, first claiming he dropped Kathie at the train station, then saying he spoke to her on the phone after she arrived in Manhattan. But here's the disturbing part. He had alibis from well-connected friends, and the investigation quickly stalled. For 18 years, Kathie's case went cold. Her body was never found. In 2001, she was declared legally dead. Her family knew the truth, but proving it seemed impossible. Enter Susan Berman, Robert Durst's college friend from UCLA and daughter of a Las Vegas mobster. After Kathie's disappearance, Susan became Robert's unofficial spokesperson, fielding questions from media and family. She knew Robert's secrets, and that knowledge would eventually cost her everything. Susan was struggling financially, often borrowing money from her wealthy friend. But she was also the keeper of deadly secrets. December 2000, just as Westchester County investigators reopened Kathie's case and planned to interview Susan, she was found dead in her Benedict Canyon home, shot execution style in the back of the head. The day Susan Berman's body was discovered, Beverly Hills police received a chilling anonymous letter. Written in block letters, it simply contained Susan's address and the word cadaver. But here's the key detail. Beverly was misspelled as Beverly. This seemingly minor error would later become the smoking gun that brought down a billionaire. The letter was clearly from someone who knew exactly where to find the body. Someone who wanted Susan found but didn't want to be connected to the discovery. The question was, who would know where she was and want her found, but also want to stay anonymous? After Susan's murder, Robert Durst disappeared from his privileged world and reinvented himself in the most bizarre way possible. In Galveston, Texas, he rented a cheap apartment under the name Dorothy Sinner, disguising himself as a mute elderly woman. Complete with wigs, makeup, and women's clothing, the heir to a billion-dollar fortune was hiding in plain sight in a rundown boarding house. But even in disguise, death followed Robert Durst. His 71-year-old neighbor Morris Black would become his next victim, September 28, 2001. According to Durst, he came home to find Morris Black in his apartment watching television. What happened next defies belief. Durst claims they struggled over a gun, and Black was accidentally shot in the head. But instead of calling police, Durst did something unthinkable. He used a saw and carving knife to dismember his neighbor's body, stuffing the pieces into garbage bags and dumping them in Galveston Bay. A 13-year-old boy discovered the torso floating in the water. Despite this horrific evidence, Durst's expensive legal team convinced a Texas jury that it was self-defense. He was acquitted in 2003. For years, Robert Durst lived free, protected by his wealth and smart lawyers. But in 2010, filmmaker Andrew Jarecki approached him about participating in a documentary. Durst incredibly agreed. He wanted to tell his story his way. The resulting HBO series The Jinx would become his undoing. During filming, Jarecki made a startling discovery. He obtained a letter that Durst had written to Susan Berman years before her death. Comparing it to the anonymous cadaver letter, the handwriting was virtually identical. down to the same misspelling of Beverly. March 15, 2015. The final episode of The Jinx was about to air. During his last interview with Jarecki, filmmakers confronted Durst with both letters, the one he admittedly wrote to Susan and the anonymous cadaver letter. When asked to identify which handwriting was his, Durst couldn't distinguish between them. After the interview, thinking he was alone, Durst went to the bathroom, but his microphone was still recording. What he said next would shock the world. "There it is, you're caught. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." The night before that final episode aired, FBI agents arrested Robert Durst at a New Orleans hotel. In his possession, a gun, over $40,000 in cash, fake identification documents, and a latex mask. He was clearly planning to flee the country. The arrest made international headlines. After decades of evading justice, the billionaire heir was finally in custody. But the legal battle was far from over. COVID-19 would delay his trial for over a year, and his health was deteriorating rapidly. When Durst's trial finally began for Susan Berman's murder, it became must-see television. The 78-year-old defendant appeared frail, often in a wheelchair connected to a catheter bag. Against his lawyer's advice, Durst took the witness stand. It was a catastrophic decision. Prosecutor John Lewin relentlessly cross-examined him for nearly 40 hours, forcing Durst to admit he'd lied under oath. The jury heard about the matching handwriting, the hot mic confession, and decades of suspicious deaths following Durst wherever he went. September 17, 2021. After deliberating for 7.5 hours, the jury found Robert Durst guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Susan Berman. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the story wasn't over. Just days after his sentencing, New York prosecutors finally charged him with Kathie's murder, nearly 40 years after her disappearance. Robert Durst had spent decades thinking his money and connections made him untouchable. He was wrong. January 10, 2022. Robert Durst died in prison at age 78, just 4 months after his conviction. He never faced trial for Kathie's murder, but her family finally had answers. His death automatically vacated his conviction due to pending appeals, but by then, it didn't matter. The world knew the truth. 3 people were dead because of Robert Durst's actions, but modern technology and persistent investigators had finally caught up to him. His billion-dollar inheritance couldn't buy him freedom from justice forever. The Robert Durst case changed how we think about wealth, privilege, and justice. For 40 years, he used his family fortune and connections to evade consequences for his actions. He thought he was smarter than everyone else, but ultimately, it was his own arrogance that brought him down. By agreeing to participate in the Jinx, he provided the evidence needed to convict him. The case also showed how modern forensic techniques, from DNA analysis to digital recording equipment, are making it harder for killers to escape justice, no matter how much money they have. Even after Durst's death, questions linger. How many other victims were there? Private investigator Bobby Baccia believes Morris Black knew Durst years before their fatal encounter and may have been involved in Kathie's disappearance. Was Durst a serial killer who used his wealth to cover his tracks for decades? We may never know the full extent of his crimes, but we know this. Money can delay justice, but it can't stop it forever. In the end, Robert Durst's own words condemned him. Killed them all, of course,